When we think about history, we usually think about the big, famous heroes. But what about the ones who are kind of hidden in the margins? Their stories are right there, written down, but for some reason we tend to overlook them. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on some of the most remarkable of these figures, the heroines of ancient Israel.
And that brings us to a huge question right off the bat. Who actually gets to tell the hero's story? Because, think about it, the person telling the tale, and all the assumptions they bring with them, that can change everything. It can decide who we remember and who we forget.
Get this. This is from the Bible's book of Judges. You've got this brutal tyrant, Abimelech, who's about to conquer a city, and his whole reign of terror comes to a crashing halt because a woman drops a piece of her own kitchen equipment on his head. So you gotta ask, how does a story like that fit into the picture we have of the ancient world?
And that story? It's not just a one-off. The book of Judges, which covers this really chaotic time in Israel before they had kings, is just full of these powerful women who completely steal the show. It really messes with our expectations. So, we're going to zoom in on 3 absolutely incredible examples. You've got Jael, who basically ends a war all by herself. You've got that unnamed woman at Thebez with her millstone, and our main case study, Deborah, who was the actual official leader of the entire nation.
Okay, so here's the puzzle, right? We have this idea that ancient societies were these super strict, male-dominated places where women just had no power. But then we have these stories of incredible female agency. So what gives? Are these just weird flukes, or have we been reading the past all wrong?
To even begin to unpack that, we need a different kind of tool. A new lens to look at these old texts. And in the academic world, that lens is called feminist biblical scholarship. And let me tell you, it has totally changed the game for how we understand these stories.
Now, what's so interesting here is the goal isn't to rewrite the Bible, it's to reread it. It asks us to really pay attention to the women in these stories, to question all these old assumptions about power, and to see if maybe, just maybe, we've been missing something huge this whole time.
And look, this isn't some brand new idea that just popped up. The roots go back more than 100 years to people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But it really blew up as a field of study in the 1970s, which led to amazing work like Phyllis Tribble's Texts of Terror, which took a fresh look at some of the really tough stories about women in the Bible.
So with this new lens in hand, scholars went back to the drawing board on the history itself. They started asking a really basic question. What was this society actually like for the women who lived in it?
Was it really this absolute top-down patriarchy we all imagine, where men had 100% of the power and women had 0? Well, the evidence suggests it was way more complicated than that.
So, scholars came up with some smarter terms. Instead of just patriarchy, some say patricentrism. This means the society was male-centered, sure, but not totally male-dominated. Women still had ways to act and have influence. Others even suggest heterarchy, a really flexible system where power wasn't just one ladder. Someone could have low status in one area, but really high status in another. It paints a much more dynamic picture.
Okay, so with all that in our back pocket, let's dive into our main case study, Deborah. She is, maybe, the most powerful and undeniable example of a female leader in the entire Old Testament. And the text is just so direct about it. She's not just some wise woman giving friendly advice. She is the judge. People from all over Israel came to her to settle their legal disputes. This was a real, official position of national authority.
And her power went way beyond the courtroom. Here she is giving a direct military order to Barak, the general of the army, and she's speaking for God. There's no wiggle room there. She is the one in charge. So the real question is, how have people read this story over the centuries?
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because depending on the lens you're using, you can walk away with 2 totally different versions of Deborah's story.
Okay, so on one hand, you have the more traditional reading. This view often sees Deborah as this big exception to the rule. God only put her in charge, the argument goes, because the men had failed. Her leadership becomes a criticism of men, not a template for women. And you'll notice she often gets talked about as a Deborah Barak team, which kind of sneaks a guy in there as her counterpart. But the feminist scholarly reading says, hold on a minute. It argues the text presents her as a leader just like Moses or Samuel, appointed by God, period. Barak's hesitation to go into battle without her isn't a sign that he's a failure, it's a sign he recognizes her incredible spiritual authority. From this angle, lumping her in with Barak is a choice people make that kind of waters down her own independent power.
So,
Why are we getting so into the weeds on a 3,000-year-old story? Well, because the way we choose to read these ancient texts has a huge ripple effect on how we understand the world, even today.
So, was Deborah just a fluke in a man's world? Or is her story actually a window into a world that wasn't what we thought it was? See, the lens you pick doesn't just tweak the details, it changes the whole story. So, what can we walk away with here? First, that reading is always an act of interpretation. We all have our biases. Second, that using new lenses can help us find voices that have been pushed to the side. Third, these stories really make us rethink what power and leadership even look like. And finally, yeah, how we read these ancient stories still has a massive impact on how we talk about gender, faith, and history right now.
You know, the biblical scholar Dr. Mercedes Garcia Bachman just nails it with this quote. She points out the irony, right? The one time the text gives us a woman with a perfect resume for the top job, the interpretation has a tendency to create a team, so she's not standing up there alone.
And that brings us right back to where we started. If incredible heroines like Deborah and Jael and the Woman at Thebez have been hiding in plain sight this whole time, it really makes you wonder, who else have we missed?